Hello, this is Paul Palmer. Welcome again to another LinkedIn Live. Let's start with a little intro. Well, I've been in the pharmaceutical industry now for 4 decades. 4 decades this year. And I decided that it was time to share that experience. Hence, I'm doing these LinkedIn Lives. But you will also find that my team are doing them on other days during the same week. And we're doing a variety of different topics. And as I've said before, I always start with the first couple of minutes with a bit of general information so that people have a chance to click and log in and watch if they're interested. Today we're talking about how shared logins destroy data integrity. My first experience of that, I would say, probably was back in the late 90s when I was auditing. And I found somebody actually had the password down at the bottom of the screen. I said, well, how do you maintain data integrity? Oh, we're just logging with that. Well, how do you know who did the test? They didn't have an answer, of course. So they got an observation from me as an auditor. I started in microbiology back in 1986 in QC. We used to write everything down. Well, that sort of doesn't need data integrity controls, does it? Because it was on a piece of paper and it was signed and dated. Well, that's the data integrity controls, but it's not the shared logins. What we did have, though, was a shared login to a computer, because we only had one computer, and I think there were 3 computers on the whole floor of about 50 people. The secretary used to type with a typewriter, but most of the team didn't have access. I think there was myself and one other. We did have a user ID and password, but that was just so that malicious people couldn't actually get in. And all we were doing was plotting the QSUM charts. If you've ever done microbiology, you'll know when you do trend analysis, the QSUM chart is actually the fastest one to show you when something's been going wrong. And we'll talk about that shortly. When you're talking about investigations, how having shared logins actually destroys your data integrity to be able to carry out that investigation. The excuses. Well, it's only a small team. Shared logins are routinely justified as practical and convenient. But data integrity requirements don't disappear just because your headcount is low. The only username shared by several people destroys individual accountability with one username. The problem becomes obvious the moment an event has to be reconstructed. Well, who did this activity? Oh, well, we don't know because we've only got one user ID and 6 different people were doing the testing that day. The risk is disproportionate to the perceived convenience because the risk is you might have to recall the product. And also, if you've not got traceability for that actual test being performed by the person that wasn't qualified or they're not competent, well, you have to actually then recall everything from everybody because you've got no traceability. GMP records must show who performed the activity. Must. It's not optional. Electronic actions must be attributable to a specific individual. Unique credentials are what connect an action to responsibility. But why? Why would you want to know that one person that carried out that activity? Well, that traceability isn't just to the person doing the test. It's traceability to a person that was already trained in doing that test, that already read that SOP, that had actually been supervised and verified as competent to do that on their own. If not, how do you know that it wasn't the person that's still under training, or the one that failed last week, or the one that's not qualified yet? You need full attribution to be able to demonstrate that only trained, qualified people are actually carrying out the testing. Attribution supports investigation, review, accountability. Without individual identification, audit trails what's the point? They lose their value because you don't know who did it anyway. Data integrity starts with knowing who actually did what activity. We need traceability. Every action linked to a name, accountable individual who actually has been trained in carrying out that activity. When you come to an investigation, events can reliably be reconstructed during audits or deviations or a different type of investigation because you want to know what happened, who was involved, and demonstrate that the person that was involved was trained, was competent, was reliable. And of course, we have accountability. If responsibility is clearly assigned, you've got accountability. But if it's diffused throughout a group, a team, or maybe everybody that's ever worked within that department, how can you demonstrate accountability? How can you hold somebody accountable for doing their role? You can't. So what do shared logins actually do? What do they break? What do they destroy? Well, identity. A user identity cannot be reliably established. You don't know who did what. Approvals. Was that person approved? Was that person authorized? Were they trained to do that approval? Detection. Unauthorized actions. Somebody else logged in because they saw that person logging in, or because it was written down somewhere, and they just logged in and they messed with the baseline of your HPLC results. Not acceptable. Audit trails. Audit trails, when you don't have identity, are pretty useless, really, because they're ambiguous. It could be anybody on the list. When you perform an investigation, you want to know that the events can be reconstructed, that who did what, when, where, how, why. Without identification, you can't do that. And then we talked about accountability. If responsibility is a collective instead of an individual, well, it's probably not going to be something that you can enforce. Of course, in a small company, you always have those who want to justify it. Well, there's only 5 of us, and everybody knows the password anyway. But they shouldn't. They shouldn't all know the password. The system only allows one account. Well, that's because you bought the wrong system in the first place. It's not an excuse for following bad practice, for not following good data integrity, for good manufacturing practice. You buy the right piece of equipment in the first place, and then it will have multiple user accounts available. Creating users takes too long. Well, often it's not actually the creation, it's the administration. It's making sure that you have that control that takes time, that you're verifying, that you're auditing, so that you know that only the right activities have been done by the right person or people. You've not got somebody that's bullying somebody else and says, oh, you need to do that today. I haven't got time. Just get on with it. But they didn't have the right level of training. They weren't competent. But they had the user ID still and the password because it's the same one that they use for all the different categories on that equipment. We trust everyone here to do the right job. But what if they think they're competent and they're not? Because they've not been qualified, they're not been verified, and they just do the work and they do it wrong. None of the explanations restores traceability once it's been lost. It's just an excuse for not following good distribution, good manufacturing, good clinical, good pharmacovigilance, best practice. You all have your own user ID and password. But what happens during an investigation if you've got shared user IDs? Well, you've got an event. A result is deleted, changed, or overwritten in the system. But you don't know who by. The audit trail reveals that it's been done by Lab 01 or maybe admin. Well, it's no use to anybody, is it? Multiple people had access. Several employees use the same credentials at the relevant time. But the evidence is replaced by interviews. And of course, if somebody's been doing it maliciously, they won't admit anything. So not only is your data useless, your interviews are too. And you can escalate into a wider data integrity concern when you don't know who's doing what. Shared credentials don't just obscure identity. They create a compounding set of security and compliance vulnerabilities, growing quietly over time. Passwords rarely change when an employee leaves if it's a shared password. Access continues beyond the authorized roles. The roles expired, people move on, but the changes that you wanted to establish are no longer effective. Informal sharing bypasses approval. Users hold privileges they don't actually individually need, and accountability for accidental and deliberate actions is weakened. You don't have it. One compromised password exposes an entire system. When a team member leaves, their access rarely disappears with them. When a password is shared informally, it bypasses the approval process entirely. Oh yeah, we've got this form which gives them the approval to use that piece of equipment, but we just shared it with them anyway because we've only got one password, so it makes no difference. If one account is compromised, when you've only got one account, the damage extends to every user of that credential. The entire system is at risk of exposure. The entire system and all its data is compromised. Imagine if you're doing a good clinical practice research, you've got one user ID, one password for a critical piece of equipment, and you find out that that password's been compromised. All the data for the last 10 years is compromised, and all those products are off the market. Audit trails cannot rescue poor access control. It's only as useful as the identity behind it. Lab 1 doesn't tell you which analyst performed the action. It means that you've got meaningless identity. Generic usernames create records that are technically complete, but actually useless. Reviewers can't distinguish authorized from unauthorized activity, and no technology can compensate for weak governance upstream. You're actually failing best practice. You're failing good manufacturing practice, good distribution practice, good clinical practice. All the best practices require individual user ID and password. So what does good look like? Good access control. You have unique accounts. Every user requires an individual account tied to their identity. With role-based access and privileges limited to what each role actually needs. Then you can also enforce prompt deactivation when somebody leaves or if their responsibility changes. And then there's periodic reviews which should be carried out to verify that only the right people have the right access, especially to critical areas. If it can't support unique users, what are you going to do about it? A system limitation does not make the risk acceptable. It makes it documented and managed. If you treat the limitation as a formal data integrity risk, assess whether the system remains suitable for GMP use. It probably doesn't. Introduce proportionate compensating controls, procedural and technical. But is everybody going to remember it every time? Restrict physical and administrative access where possible. Lock it in a cupboard. Is that really what you want to do with your computer? Define a clear remediation or replacement strategy. You can't treat a known problem, a known system weakness as acceptable simply because it's inconvenient to fix. It's just like any GMP practice. Just because it's inconvenient doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it. You need to document the risk, apply the controls, and plan total remediation, which is likely to mean changing the system. Because convenience is not control. Shared logins save minutes. Yes, they do. But they can cost you in credibility, compliance standing, and regulatory confidence. And that's much bigger than a few extra pounds on a system that actually is compliant. And spending the time to set it up properly with unique user IDs for every single user that's authorized to use that system, and actually deactivating them when they're no longer available. Small teams are not exempt from basic data integrity principles. Trust between colleagues isn't sufficient to replace traceability. Inspectors, when I go and audit a site, I'm not looking to see what the inspector looked at, but the inspector is looking to see what somebody did, what each individual did, and how they can demonstrate that that person was trained. Well, if you've got multi-user access, they can't do that. If everyone uses the same login, you might know what happened, but you don't know who did it. And it's the same when you go and audit a subcontractor, a supplier. It's not just your own activities that you want to be in your mind. You want to be cognizant of what happens at your subcontractors. Do they have shared logins? Because it's not acceptable for you to subcontract to a site that doesn't follow the same guidelines, the same rules. So your auditors need to know as well. Now, I hope you found today useful. Thank you for your time. I'd like to invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Paul R. Palmer, and follow my YouTube channel, youtube.com/@Paul R. Palmer. If you'd like more training, if you'd like to book a workshop, please do contact us at www.academypharmaceuticalexcellence.com or email info@academypharmaceuticalexcellence.com. I look forward to hearing from you all soon, but in the meantime, any comments or questions that you have, please do place them in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you soon.